Ladies and gentlemen, if you are outside the ballroom one, please come and take your seats because we're about to begin our plenary session for this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the plenary session. Thank you.
Invite you to take your seats. We will be commencing the program shortly. Thank you for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, may we please invite you to take your seats. We will be commencing the program shortly. Thank you for your cooperation.
For the KNBS choir, a round of applause, a big round of applause for the angelic voices. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. This is day. This is day. Are you excited? Let me hear your excitement. Are you ready for an excited a brand new day? Are you excited for today? Are you ready to learn? No, you're not. Excitement. Are you ready to learn? Are you ready to collaborate for the future? All right, let's get going. Today's plenary is about AI and emerging technologies, opportunities and risks, and realities. Our moderator for this plenary is the program officer of Hewlett Foundation, where he oversees grant making and evidence-informed policy making for East and West Africa. With a mighty round of applause, and I say mighty, we've been doing this all week, mighty round of applause. Welcome Mr. Chris Maloney. Mr. Chris Maloney. Round of applause until he gets up on stage. A round of applause.
I have not heard nearly enough Swahili at this Global Data Festival, so I needed to start. Can you hear me? Is this better? Hello? All right. I'll start again. Hamjambo, Manbibi, Namabwana, Nahabari, Zabazbui. Say, there we go. It's a Global Data Festival. We need more Swahili. Anyway, so I am Chris Maloney, Program Officer from the Hewlett Foundation in California. As Carissa mentioned, I oversee our grant making on evidence-informed policy making in East and West Africa, where we support primarily African-based and led grantees that are unlocking different parts of the data revolution for better policy making. As Carissa said, we're here to talk about AI and emerging technologies and opportunities, risks, and realities. We have an often set of keynotes and panelists who are going to talk about AI for the public good, AI in space, and Africa and global AI governance. And so to set this scene, like we've done in the other plenaries, we have a Slido, which hopefully we can pull up. So please get your phones ready. Do we have our Slido? There we go. So our first question, how often do you use AI in your work or personal life? Luckily, this isn't anonymous, so don't worry. If you're like me, it's probably rarely or occasionally. All right, we got some power users. Excellent. Wow, we got some daily users here. I had read recently that on a per capita basis, Kenya is one of the biggest users in the world globally on AI. I think we're seeing that right here. All right, well, we see a majority are excellent and daily AI users in your work and personal life. Why don't we go on to the second question? Getting some last minute votes in there. There we go. So our second question, a provocative one. Do you think AI will result in net losses or gains in terms of jobs? What do you believe? If you're like me, many of these Slidos, I sure wish there was a question option C where I could say it depends. That's a pretty tight race here. right. So 60-40 split. So this is a tech optimist crew. I'm glad to. Why don't we go to this third slide of question? All right. What do you think is the most useful application of AI in global development? Is it agriculture? Is it financial services for the poor? Climate adaptation, or something else? Now we get to something else. Anyway. Interesting. We got some microfinance folks here. Excellent. All right. Well, lots of opinions in the room. That's the whole point of this plenary this morning. But before I bring up our first keynote speaker, I just thought I would start our morning with a bit of a provocation. Many of you know Al Kaggs, the former director of the Open Institute, and he recently published a piece where he said, data is a tool that the powerful use, and a tool that the rest of us must learn to wield against, alongside, or in spite of them. He goes on to say, the AI conversation across the global south is heavily tilted towards ethics and governance, which is critical. But the harder truth is that for those in the global south, few are using the tools productively. Little of the AI deployed understands local context and local language, and few of the AI tools being built are built by those in the global south. And so ultimately we risk producing beautifully drafted legislation that constrains our own ability to build while doing nothing to slow the flood of foreign models designed for someone else's life. If you ask me, that is a pretty powerful and profound statement, and definitely provocative. And so how should we respond to it? Is it correct? How should we be using AI against, alongside, and in spite of those who might have more power? How do we avoid bad outcomes in a deeply power asymmetric environment? So to kick us off, I'd like to invite our first keynote, Ambassador Philip Tigo, Special Envoy for Technology in the Office of the President of Kenya. Ambassador Tigo.
I'm not that tall, so. And I'll say it in English because you said it in Kiswahili. Good morning. I haven't greeted anybody in Kiswahili. Thank you so much, Chris. And I think Al Kaggs' kind of blog sets the context of the reality where we are in right now. I think this session speaks about three issues. One, I think, is risks, realities, and opportunities. But let me set the context. And I think the problem that we see in most places is that we still think we live in the digital age. I think we don't. We actually live in an age of intelligence where intelligence has become the currency of transaction and where everything we do is determined by a certain form of intelligence. You order a car, some of you took an Uber, somehow a car showed up in your house, it called it home. When you went to work, you never labeled your Google Maps work, it labeled it itself and said work. It never asked you, it never determined anything. So you're sort of working with an intelligent being who's very, in most cases, much smarter than we are. So in this age of intelligence, I think, where I see the reality is, and you mentioned a couple of them. One is that we had a lot of disinvestment in previous industrial revolutions where a lot of our countries still do not have the digital public infrastructure. We still are not connected. A majority of our populations are still not online in this continent. We still do not have power. AI relies on a lot of energy. We still do not have enough energy to power these resources in this continent. You mentioned Africa specifically. Only 1% of data centers are in Africa. 1%. And 50% are in South Africa. So it means even in the continent, we see a lot of inequalities. 60%, 600 million Africans are not connected on electricity, but also we know there's device scarcity. Many folks are not on devices. The fiscal picture is even worse. AI requires massive investments. Africa is still in debt. Our development trajectory is still very much resource intensive. We still are the continent with not necessarily fiber. Kenya potentially punches above its weight with almost 10 fiber optics coming to the cable, but again, susceptible to undersea, subsea influences. Last year alone, we know what happened when we had fiber cuts undersea. AI itself is concentrated amongst a few countries and a few companies. That is East and West. So Europe, thank you for joining us in this cause because we're in the same boat. But I think also if you look at the talent is skewed. The continent also does not have a lot of AI talent in terms of just per capita output, in terms of churning from universities, whether engineers, researchers, data scientists, and worse off, policy specialists, where we don't have a lot of government folks who understand how to legislate or regulate artificial intelligence. When it comes to languages, Chris has mentioned, to be specific, Africa has 2,000 languages. You can imagine how many of these languages are in any AI models. 0. And so, as we think about that reality, let's go also to another reality. We're in the governance framework. And only last year did every part of this continent become part of the Global Digital Compact. For 10 years, none of our countries in the Global South were in any way or shape or form involved in any AI governance framework globally. G7, G20, when I mention the names, you know those are exclusive clubs. And so only last year, with the Global Digital Compact, is when we got folks in the UN engaged. When it comes to risks, of course, I don't have to mention them. Frontier risks are those that are existential, the ones that we hear. AI will walk into the room, please, Hollywood, you made a mess of our heads. We expect a Terminator to walk up and kill us all. I don't think that will happen. But I think frontier risks are real. But for me, socio-technical risks are even more real in our continent. Misinformation, disinformation, child safety. We see a lot of these things happening here, and we know it's happening. Synthetic media, collapse of provenance, and worse off, lack of human agency. Chris, you mentioned Kenya, yes, we use ChatGPT, but guess for what? Emotional advice and companionship. Kenyans, you are lonely. Please get out and touch grass. And so I think for me, these risks, and the larger risk I think for me is the possibility of rendering people invisible. And I think for me that's the biggest one, and that speaks to this committee on data. I think in terms of opportunity, AI can accelerate AI. And I think for me that's a big opportunity. I forgot one risk, of course, is climate, we know, water, land, and a lot of these things that data centers are gobbling. I think the opportunity for me is in this room, is how do we use AI to accelerate AI? How do we ensure that we can leverage this possibility and capability to begin to drive development outcomes so that we can begin to solve these all problems, whether it's in agriculture, food systems, development planning, using geospatial and earth observations, but whether ensure that these technologies actually work for public good and for human flourishment. In the UN high-level advisory body, I know we made a lot of recommendations, but the one recommendation I think I want to make, and hopefully this group will take, because nobody has taken it, is the idea of a global AI data framework. Nobody has taken that up. We've taken up everything, the scientific panel, the global dialogue, but we still need a data framework, and it could be interesting if it comes from this community, but more or less from the global south. Thank you very much.
And now for our second keynote, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Kaizen Kozhiev, the chairman of the board of the Kazakh Space Agency.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. My name is Kaizen. I am from Kazakhstan. Actually, I'll try to be short as I can. First of all, I would like to share my impression. Unfortunately, I arrived only yesterday for the second day of the event, but I meet really one startup, guys with flames in the eyes, and they showed the story about their projects, and I saw that there is a lot what we as a Kazakh can learn from Kenyan engineers, and put my big trust on you about our future cooperation. Actually, we are blessed to talk about AI, emerging technology, etc., but anyway, everybody understands all AI just really depends on the data. AI depends not only on the data I can share, maybe it only depends on the people who can create good flows, because more of that, it depends on the final results what we're expecting. I'm fully believe that to create real goals, we need to communicate more. Only these visits, I appreciate that a big team from Kenya visited Kazakhstan a few weeks ago. Now we are doing our steps. Only through that we will understand each other, and through that only we can create really strong win-win cooperation. As we know, Kazakhstan Garab Shapare, where I'm working for the last few years, actually we are working with the satellites. We are trying to get data, do analytics, etc., etc. I can't talk about that much, but actually goal as it's not like a technology as for technology. It's goal like get technology as a help economy, help people to make a right decision. So if you like have any idea about that, and to get the correct and right data, we are trying to be more global. As you probably know, so we already started joint project for constellation of satellites, and our partners is the Republic of Congo and Nigeria. And I do believe that more and more countries will be part of that, because through that we are going to grab exact correct data to put through analytics to use AI. And I do believe that all Africans will be like not user of AI as a result, will be like real part of like a space economy. So join us for partnership. We will help you. I know that through that days we will learn a lot from you. Thank you for this opportunity. That's all.
All right. Thank you again, Ambassador Tigo and Mr. Kojayev, for those keynotes. So we will now jump into the panel, and I'd like to invite up my distinguished panelists, starting first with Lynette Nyangao, who's the Executive Director of the Institute for Development Data, Fabrizio Scorlini, the Senior Director of Programs for Humanitarian OpenStreetMaps, Matthew Pennells, who's the Director of Global Community Engagement at Esri, Janet McLaren, Policy Manager from GPSDD, and Charlene Migwe, who is the Deputy Regional Director for Eastern Southern Africa at ID Insight. All right. I'm just making sure that's working. Is it working? All right, great. Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you all for joining me this morning, where we're going to talk about three main topics: AI for the public good, AI in space, and Africa and global AI governance. So I'm amazed that we're going to cover these three topics in 20 minutes, but there we go. So first, Lynette and Fabrizio, let's start with AI for the public good. So Lynette, my question for you is similarly quite simple and very easy to answer in 5 minutes or less. But what are the blockers that you have encountered that limit AI's potential to impact the common good?
Great. Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I will very quickly talk about three instead of one. And I'll start off by the things that we see are really impeding how, and I will talk about Africans and African countries are engaging with AI. Number one is skills, financing and investment, and data. And when we talk about skills, Chris, you've talked about Kenyans being among the top users of AI, but then how many models are actually coming from Kenya and what kind of development is happening? Yesterday's panels that talked about AI, a lot of questions were asking, why are African countries not using AI? And one of the responses I gave in one of the panels was because governments generally are very risk-based, so they do not go into new things. And we have seen some of the issues that have come out of companies, global companies, going into AI so fast, and you know how much they're spending on that. Do we have the right skills to be able to do the right thing for our people? And the skills that we're talking about here are not just technical skills. My background is computer science, so I'm not expecting that everyone will be a software engineer and will go in and develop models. But then there are skills about identifying the risks. There are skills about identifying the groups that need, this AI for public good. And when we're talking about this, we also have to look at, how are the skills being developed in school? How are the skills being developed from a very young age to the extension of developing the AI, so that we also become not just users, but also developers. The second part on investment and financing. To fully have impact when it comes to new technologies, Ambassador Tigo has talked about us not being in a digital age anymore. But for us to move onto that intelligence age, we also need investments to be able to do this. If you're going to do anything at scale, we have to have the right kinds of investments. And investments are not just from the global communities, the donors, it's also investments locally and investments from governments. Professor Mariana Mazzucato, in her book, The Entrepreneurial State, talks about how governments, and specifically the government of America, invested in the very pioneer technologies. When you're talking about, GPS, when you're talking about Wi-Fi, and even now with AI, you would hear American companies talking about, subsidies and the kind of investments that the governments are making. Can African countries also do that? And then very finally, on data. You cannot do data well if you do not have the right data or if you do not have good data. We have a lot of disaggregated data. For the last about 16 years of the data revolution in African countries, we continue to talk about the issues of data. Do we have the right data? Why do we have data silos? Why do we have people who are not, invested in working with data? And in this case, we work in developing the data infrastructure for Africa. And data infrastructure is not just fiber optics and the very technical, physical infrastructure. Data infrastructure involves people as well. It involves, systems in how that data is going to be developed. And then we have the data itself. So we have to look at all these aspects when we're thinking about the barriers and try to address the aspects for us to be able to move on to the next level. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lynette. So the blockers, skills, investment, and data. But thank you for taking us deeper in what specifically in those matter. So I appreciate that specificity. All right. Fabrizio, talk to us a little bit about what you see as the levers to making AI more just, accountable, and grounded in real-world needs.
Jambo Asante, gracias. Thank
Asante.
you for welcoming me here today. That's a critical question, I think. And we need to look a bit beyond the algorithms here. Like, we need to look at what's behind the algorithms. And what behind the algorithm is data. Data that is not often collected for the purpose that these algorithms are being now deployed. Data that is often missing, as Ambassador Tigo reminded us about the 2,000 languages that are just not there here in Africa, but also about, for instance, map data, which is what my organization actually works with. When you are not on the map, you are definitely not there to receive support, to receive help. As we learned in our foundational moment in Haiti at Port-au-Prince, where we responded to an incident where essentially, Port-au-Prince was not on the commercial maps. And people like Médecins Sans Frontières, the Red Cross, and others had to rely on volunteers in the US digitalizing satellite imagery to support the response. That's the foundational moment where the absence of data can be turned into data available for action on the ground. But that reality still remains. This was 15 years ago. And we are now responding to Ebola in this same continent, nearby in DRC. We are still finding the same challenge. The contact tracing that is needed to actually understand an epidemic needs to rely on data that is available for this to happen. And you need to do this ideally before the incident happens, not during the incident. That means you need a digital public infrastructure in place to do this. And we are so lucky to count on the generosity of satellite imagery companies that essentially provide this imagery to us and others so we can, provide a response. But in the end, there's something wrong there. We are relying on generosity, not on rules, not on a digital public infrastructure that is designed so when this incident happens, that data is available in a reliable way that can be sustained over time so we can do our work as well in an anticipatory manner. So when you think about this data that is missing, or that we need a certain level of coordination for this to happen, that is transcending commercial interest to actually look into our collective or public interest. So when you talk about levers, like one big thing is, of course, about who is collecting the data, who is actually doing that kind of work, how that's actually representative of the realities on the ground, and that's super important and often misunderstood. I think in the articles you shared before we joined this panel, you also have all these stories about these people, being data labelers, people that are actually building the infrastructure, just, consistently ignored and underpaid. We cannot just afford that. If you really want, good data, good trained data. That has to be addressed. And on the other hand, I will say that we also need to consider like the building of this digital infrastructure that my colleague was referring here. How does it look like beyond the policy paper? We need to get this done, right? So we need to get the engineers in the room. We need to make sure that those engineers are properly supported and are addressing the shared challenges. And finally, I think I would say that we also need to set up the right accountability mechanisms. Principle-wise, I think we're getting there. Like, you know, people are after, I think my last tally of this was like 70 declaration of principles around AI. So we got that covered. I think we are, you know, we're there. But like how these principles are enforced, I think that's critical. So from where I sit at the moment, where we are actually developing AI for assisted mapping, so you know mappers can be supported and advance the mapping processes in a more efficient manner. We are trying to practice what we preach, basically. So we are working with communities to collect data in an open manner. We are developing an open algorithm that hopefully reflects that community reality, and also putting humans in the loop. So when the algorithm is deployed, you also get humans validating the data and ultimately like supporting the efforts, the mapping efforts that are like happening at the moment. But that kind of work is hard. And developing this type of work is an endeavor that has to be collective. And of course, there is room for the private sector as well to step in. But algorithms just cannot be pushed like from a distant lab in some distant place on a reality that is not completely understood. We need to work that out, and that's a human endeavor, not an automation endeavor. So yes, in the end, as my colleague was saying, as Mr. Tigo was saying, it's a human endeavor where the Global South has much to offer, where the Global North as well has much to offer. Like the balance of this, the dance that needs to happen for this actually to become something that serves all humanity is actually what is at stake at the moment. We play this really small role in a little corner of the geospatial world, but this debate happens across all domains. And as a result, that's the challenge for all of us in order to actually expand these debates, these questions, but these actions as we move forward in this agenda.
Thanks so much, Fabrizio. I think you're talking so much also, again, around when we think about these questions of power, what are their contours, right? And I'm hearing from you key issues around who is collecting this data and the nuance around that. These questions of infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure, and 70 accountability mechanisms, very little enforcement. So these are all ultimately power. So from these ground level questions, we're now going to go to AI in space. So if you're an American of a certain generation, you might remember the Muppet Show, and everything was in space. So anyway, but jokes aside. So Matthew, I would love it if you could talk to us a little bit about how have companies used geospatial data to train AI, and what have been the real world impacts of that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I think it's, first of all, it's such an emerging space. You ask me this question tomorrow and you get a different answer. I think the first thing is, though, is that the geospatial industry has been doing this for quite a while. It's just got trendy with the new name of AI. If you look back, feature extraction from imagery has been going on for a number of years. It's all sort of just big data, whichever buzzword you want to call it. But I think as we now bring it into the AI reality, it was obviously a lot about imagery, pixels, and understanding what pixels were. Was something a building, was something a forest, what land cover. That kind of continues. I'd say that's quite a mature process now. It's getting better and easier with compute power. I think more and more now you're seeing things like spatial embeddings, which is more in the AI ecosystem, but also GPS tracks, LiDAR data, different types of sourced imagery, street view imagery, live imagery, video feeds, and this kind of stuff. So I think that's where the thing. As it comes to the training, I think obviously we know that there are biases in many types of technology, including AI and training. So I think we definitely encourage our users to train on what it's meant for, in the locality, spatial resolution, and temporal resolution as well. But also, we also try to, though, sort of lead in the conversation, try to put out some models so they kind of don't have a blank screen to start at. Because there's no point us all learning from scratch. We can definitely share some of that learning. So we've heard different work about sort of sharing knowledge and practices and data commons and so forth that are examples of those. But really that training discussion, I think, is ongoing. But I'd also say the sort of flip side to the question is the responsibility of doing some of this training. There's no point big tech companies putting loads of effort in and doing things that aren't useful locally. They definitely want to lead the conversation, but we've got to be very mindful that there's a legal framework that's very unclear right now. The legal landscape around AI is just, I mean, they're trying to play catch up, and they're not an organization or an industry that moves that quickly. The same as academia is trying to keep up and teach AI, you know, same principles. But also the climate impacts of AI are massive. You know, so if we all start running the same models, doing the same thing, we're creating more problems somewhere else by burning through. I can't remember, there's many stats out there, but a 5-second video of AI-generated video is the same as charging your phone 25 times. So it's not responsible for everyone to be doing everything. And then there's great programs there where if there is going to be AI data training, to speak locally, you've got programs like Dish North Africa and even Kenya Space Agency are doing it once so that their colleagues in the country or in the continent can learn from it or use it. So there's that kind of, if people are going to put effort into training, it needs to be done in a shared fashion so that not everyone's burning not just the energy, but they can do it once and learn. So I think it's an emerging space. Maybe that gives you a little bit of an insight onto it, but it's doing it within the context of watching what the legal frameworks are saying, because this new EU AI law that's come out means some of the things that we were doing technically, our users shouldn't be doing because they're classed as what they call high risk, but that's still so undefined and untested in the legal systems that it's not clear. So I think, not to say don't do it, but definitely talk to your colleagues before you do some of these trainings, because it might already be done. It might be working in these examples where what's the level of accuracy needed? Can I identify a damaged building after a disaster? Then we don't all need to do that. It needs to be done once, shared in a public infrastructure, and then we can all work off the same data. Unfortunately, still in the disaster ecosystems now, it's getting better, but you'll still see 10 different companies doing the same thing and trying to offer up for good. And they're doing it in the best intentions. But if we can coordinate around that better, then that obviously reduces that AI impact, but also increases the quality of data. Thank you.
Thanks so much for those remarks. It's interesting to reflect a little bit between you and Fabrizio on sort of on the ground versus on sort of the frontier technologies, but the issues are not too dissimilar. But thank you also for introducing these questions around legal risk, about avoiding duplication, also very important parameters to keep in mind as well. So for our last part of this panel, I'm going to turn to Charlene and to Janet to talk a bit about Africa and global AI governance. And Janet, I'll start with you. What is the value of a global framework for governing AI in a fragmented world? Another simple question.
Yeah, thanks. I know that we all know that we're living through a time of enormous change, and we're in a pivotal moment. The rise of generative AI, as we've talked about this week in many sessions, has really increased the emphasis on data, digital infrastructure, and the rules that govern them. I think almost everyone so far has mentioned some of these rules. They're at the top of the mind, of our minds. This summer, the UN will convene the Global Dialogue on AI Governance and a parallel process on AI, the Global Dialogue on AI and the Working Group on Data Governance, two parallel processes. And that came out of the Global Digital Compact, which Ambassador Tigo mentioned is an opportunity, I think, for a more inclusive process. This could be an opportunity to shift power if it is seized. Member states are going to come together to talk about whether and how AI and data can be governed collectively. And I think that's an important question that concerns all of us. The power in these systems is so highly concentrated, and the decisions that are being made in boardrooms and in policy circles and in other small spaces are going to have impact on us for decades. And so I think it's easy to be disillusioned or cynical about these high-level global conversations. But at the end of the day, I think what they do is they create space for more of us to engage and to shape the norms and the rules that will affect us for the future. They're not going to solve every problem. They're not going to address these really practical challenges necessarily that we experience on the ground. And we know for sure they're not going to overnight rebalance power in the international space. But what they can do is help us to build shared norms, identify common interests, and ensure that the future of AI is not determined by the very small subset of people, institutions, and countries that are involved in decision making. We already know that AI is transforming our society. We saw on the Slido how many of us are using it. The question, I think, now is whether we can come together as a global community to make changes that will ensure that the benefits of this technology can be more widely shared.
Thank you for that. And thank you for also calling out sort of this tension I think many of us sort of sense or feel but rarely articulate about the temptation to be cynical about some of these global agreements. Because at the end of the day, it's the space that matters. Because if we don't have those spaces, then nothing is going to change. And so, I take hope in that, if nothing else. So last and certainly but not least, Charlene, a question for you. How can Africa shape the landscape of global AI governance?
Great, and can you hear me? Okay, so I think, Chris, I was a cynical around this global conversations on governance. And we did, before I joined ID Insight, we did a project around all these global norms and standards we're setting. Are implementers actually taking them up? We talk about human in the loop. Is it happening? How are they doing it? And what are they grappling with? It was sad to see that most of them are not. These are innovators who are trying to make sustainable solutions. And where are we meeting them where they're at? So at ID Insight, to give a bit more context, because I'm going to give the Africa perspective from a practitioner's lens, because I think we have the tangible outputs from some of the AI work that's happening in the continent that can be elevated to inform some of the global governance conversations. And that's why I'm no longer cynical, because I think it's still important to have both levels. And at ID Insight, we've done a lot of short-term AI fractional engineering support for a number of social sector players and a number of governments across the world. Particularly in Africa, we see three main things. We see, as everyone knows, data is important. I'm not going to deep dive into that. But I think what I will emphasize on Africa's value in the global governance conversation on data is the most exciting conversations I have in the ecosystem right now is on language data. These guys are doing transformational work, the Masakanes and the rest. They're creating new methodologies of how to collect data that would improve AI systems. But more importantly, they're coming up with new power dynamics in data collection that's feeding AI. We see a lot of IPs or licenses that are coming up on how do you collect language data in a sustainable manner where communities can actually generate value from that data. We're seeing, because language data, if you think about it critically, we wouldn't say, oh, we've collected Kiswahili data, that's it, goodbye, 1 year, we're done. It's a consistent and continuous process as languages evolve. That means there's consistent community engagement around that. That's where Africa can play a role in defining what that consistent, inclusive data collection means in a more inclusive manner, and communities can derive value from that. The second one is on models. I think we forget about models. Our data science team and ourselves, we always make jokes that all models are bad, some are useful. And sometimes we lie to people, we lie to policymakers, we lie to people that our model is foolproof, you can use it for blah, 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 blah. But we need to be honest in the consistent management and support that the models that we're putting out there to make critical decisions that affect citizens and what's needed for that to be done. So how can we have accountability systems around that from a governance model? And my last one is on use cases and learning. If we think about the number, and all of us can attest here, all those in the AI ecosystem, a lot of people come to us at ID Insight and say, we want AI. I think it's going to help me with it. Another strong governance question is when to use AI and when not to use AI. And AI is really useful for the we're in a critical time in history where our resources are very limited. How do you make sure we're using the resources for the right way? Don't just give a ministry or a social sector partner a machine learning model that would and maybe a simple data lake or data infrastructure would support that ministry. So the governance of AI systems on when and not to use with the resources we have. And lastly, the learning that comes out of it and how we elevate it into governance conversations. We're going to hopefully do that in Geneva, and we're trying to think about, at ID Insight, one of the questions that really we struggle with the most is on all these AI things. What impact are they having? What are the socio-economic impacts we're seeing with citizens in themselves? So we came up with an AI evaluation playbook with the Agency Fund and the Center for Global Development. That's an open source tool. I'm happy to share it with everyone. And it looks at how do you think about and how do you ground all the different standards we have in the world, the global standards? What does it mean when it comes to a practitioner's perspective? How do you make sure in Africa, for example, you're looking at the models? How do you evaluate models? How do you evaluate the product in itself when it touches the hands of users? How do you evaluate user impact? And how do you, at ID Insight, we're known mostly for impact evaluations, which are rarely affordable for most people. What are the other ways, such as A/B testing, that can support really making sure we are governing our AI systems in Africa in a way that it's being able to have the most impact on the citizens that we want, and governments are at the heart of all that, because governments are the only ones who can scale impact, and how do we have all that in one loop? Yeah.
Thanks so much, Charlene. Again, underpinning everything you said, I'm hearing this common theme, this important theme of truth-telling and honesty, whether that's about where the data is coming from and who owns that data and how are we being respectful of communities that are providing that data, especially in language, the accountability of the models that we're using and where they come from, and then really interesting now, really thinking hard about measuring and understanding the impact of these models. So yeah, thank you for sort of bringing this into reality for all of us too. So we are lucky because we have about 5 to 10 minutes to actually get questions from the audience, which I know we have not had that luxury of in many of these plenaries. So we're going to do that in a very high-tech way, which I hope is not too clunky, but once again, I'm going to ask you to take out your phones, and if my AV friends can pull up the Slido. We already have questions, amazing, okay. So open up the QR code and please put up a couple of questions, and I'm going to collect a few and then invite my distinguished panel to respond to them. All of us have very stiff necks as a result of this setup, but we're doing the best we can.
I mean, I can take on that one.
Sure, if you'd like to.
I mean, in essence, OpenStreetMap is a whole ecosystem. The data is available, ready to download. So yes, it's something that the map changes every day as life, and that data is downloadable. There are like several ways in which you can use the data. We at HOT provide an export tool, particularly for humanitarian purposes, that you can access through an API. But generally speaking, I think that will be the beauty, is that the more we have access to different sources of imagery, that map gets to improve. The more aligned the interests are in order to improve that map, particularly for humanitarian issues, but we can go beyond that. That's how better quality will emerge. And the beauty of OpenStreetMap as well is that everyone, including researchers, can contribute to it. It's a shared endeavor for all mankind. So you can contribute, you can access it, and hopefully make it better.
Great, thanks so much, Fabrizio. All right, now we're getting question palooza, which is what I was a little bit worried about. This is great. I want to be respectful of some of the thumbs upping, so if we go to the top just so I can see which questions are getting the most thumbs ups. Awesome, great. Interesting, all right. So the second question is up to, all right, now I have this at the 3. This is an interesting one. As a Gen Xer myself, and then our older generations as well, how are we thinking about how we ensure AI works? And I would say not just for the older generations, but for the generally tech less savvy, because I think that's something that applies to all sorts of different generations in different contexts and language, location, your access to electricity, having a phone or a computer that can do these things. Anybody want to talk a little bit about how we think about improving AI access and equity? Lynette, I'm kind of looking at you.
Yeah, I can take that. We have to appreciate where different generations access AI from. And we have seen that most of the vulnerabilities that come with AI, especially for the older generation, around disinformation and misinformation. So how do we ensure, in Kenya, we like to joke that our mothers in WhatsApp groups are not sharing, deep fakes as well. So there's a lot of sensitization that needs to happen. I personally take issue with language when we talk about language, because we also need to appreciate the evolution of language. Because languages, for instance, African languages are quickly depreciating, and as more people tend to speak global languages like English or French or our original language that is Swahili. So it is about understanding the different users and where they are, but specifically for the older generation, not Gen Xers. It's also about informing. But we have been victim of spreading disinformation, misinformation ourselves. So I think there needs to be a little more sensitization around identifying what AI is doing and how we can actually use it more effectively. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that. Matthew.
Sure, yeah, if I may, I just wanted to share a really interesting example around that. There's some work going on, National Geographic and a company called Place down in a small island, Pacific island called Tuvalu, which is probably going to be one of the first full nations lost to sea level rise. And what they've done there is said, look, they've put a really challenging question to the UN to say, will you still recognize us as a nation if we don't have a landmass, which breaks every rule ever written. So they put really good questions forward. But the other thing they're doing is building up a digital twin type environment of their culture, and not just the map, but song, dance, language. And they're putting that into, when it's not called anymore, but a metaverse type environment to then be able to teach culture, etc., moving forward, even when their homeland may be no longer physically there. So I think thinking about accessibility and how to use these tools to make sure culture does live on. Is it perfect? No, but is it one option? So it's a really interesting example. Thank you.
Super interesting, thanks for that. I like this number, the question that has 16 thumbs ups is, because it's an important one with no easy answers. And so Charlene and Janet, get ready. But what needs to happen to move from a conversation to making progress? Now that's written very broadly, but I assume what this is referring to is, we have this conference, we have 20 other AI and data governance conferences, we have all sorts of multilateral processes going on, we have bilateral processes going on, we have lots and lots and lots of great documents and conversations, but what is really changing, especially given just how concentrated power is in this space? Are we sort of just hitting a brick wall? So how do we move from conversation to change? Your mic.
How about that? Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say that this is talking about moving from these big governance conversations or conversations about progress to actually making practical change and moving forward. And I think there are many potential answers to this question. I think two key things, though, are partnerships and investment. And I think partnerships and investment towards capacity building, skills increase, infrastructure, actual feet on the ground in terms of who's putting policies and legal frameworks into practice. And I think that includes ensuring that digital connectivity reaches the people who are currently off the grid. And I think that includes bringing more people into the conversation. And I think all of that is powered through partnerships and investment.
Yeah, so I'd said earlier, I was a skeptic of global conversations. I think they're very important. I think the challenge I have was a question that has been asked. How do we move those conversations into the continent, into action? And it is practically meeting the innovate. Whether you are there or not, they will innovate. They will use the data. They will build models. Where do you find them? Do you find them in hubs? How do we engage innovators? Because citizens interact with the systems that they use. They don't interact with us as policy makers or etc. Number two, we have to resource them, and we have to resource it and scale what's already working. If you want, every time we speak about scale, it's frustrating where we say, yeah, we're going to scale it and move it to other countries. And if you think about it, the business model for AI systems is not like any other digital system in the world. You know how we used to do when you had e-commerce sites and you say, the more users you have, it acts to this. It's much harder to understand how to scale existing AI systems. Resourcing it more into understanding the markets that they're in. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And what I'm hearing is the spaces matter. We need to think very intentionally about who is in those spaces. And then it's this deeper question of specificity and resourcing the things that work. And again, the type of work that ID Insight is doing with CGD to help understand what actually is working is key. Fabrizio and Matthew, I was thinking maybe you guys might tackle from space and from the ground this question on up to what limit is my data safe? I think what this is really saying is how do we think about data safety, whether that's working directly with communities or as we're looking at pixels of the entire globe. How do you guys think about safety in your respective lanes, I guess?
Safety has several dimensions. Like in our case, when you collect the data, you need to make sure the people doing it are actually safe in humanitarian spaces. And that's a very, sensible thing to do. Like we do have ethical protocols on how that data is collected, particularly in some cases, even protecting the identity of who is collecting the data and running the analysis. In some work scenarios, that has been the case for HOT. So there's an element very tangible there, like good old-fashioned, ethical protocols around data collection. But when you move a level up, which is like, okay, what kind of infrastructure we are going to have to actually make your data safe, that's where we need to work with the private sector and with the government sector as well. We need, a strong, solid, framework, to make geospatial data safe and reliable in the long run, particularly if we are building together a digital infrastructure for that. That's not there, by the way. So in some countries, in some places, maybe, but at the moment, that's not there. At Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, we do our best actually to have those maps available to authorities. We do have our backups, our copies. We do have ways in which people can reach to us to correct those maps. But and vandalism in this open platform is, not very common, but there's a possibility. So what I will recommend there is to think, in the particular case of this user, what's safety for you? What's the threat model behind that? And from our end, it's how these three sectors coordinate. So geospatial data is truly a public asset that we can rely upon when the time comes.
Yeah, again, where do you start? I think so. I'll build off Fabrizio's comments. So there are some efforts. There's a movement called Overture Maps Foundation, which is trying to bring a balance and checks and balances approach to OpenStreetMap's a fantastic resource. They're trying to bring a stabilization layer above to avoid vandalism in the data, so that then decision makers, whether they be private companies or governments, can use the data and know that it's been sort of verified in that way. So the more layers of verification is one route, and as a company, we take part in that sort of consortium. But also then on the complete personal side of things, I was at a conference a couple of days ago, and I won't ask people to do it now, but they said get your phone out, look to settings and privacy and see how many apps have access to your location. And it's a shocking number. And I think actually what I'd say is there's a bit more personal control than maybe we give actually realize. You can go in and turn off a lot of these settings in social platforms and other platforms. Some make sense to have on, but then it's that compromise. Am I happy to share a bit of my data to be able to make my drive to work easier? And that's obviously a personal decision. So I say there is a bit more control in there. I think lastly, how do we ensure it more as an Esri perspective? We have something called the Living Atlas, which is about 12,000 data sets that we don't make them, they come from other places, they're contributed. And we go through our checks to say, are you Kenya Statistics Bureau? Yes, we know you are. Therefore, your data is going to appear higher in a search, so that then if there are humans or AI, agentic AI reading data, looking for population data or traffic data, they're finding stuff that's meant to be there. Not that anyone's putting out this malicious data, but someone does a student project and posts the data. You don't want that to come up top. You want the government data or the data from TomTom or here to come higher up. So there's an element of your data being sort of checked and balanced, but I think personally we have a bit more control, and as a company we have to comply with about 190 countries worth of data rules to say that this is verified or this doesn't get released. And I don't want to get to mapping and what people like to call their sea versus borders of countries. It gets very complex. So yeah, you open a map in different places, it looks different, and that's a lot of work on our side to make sure people's data is in context and safe.
Lovely. Thanks for that. Thanks for both those. Those of you who missed it, there was a joke question up there, which is what if I am AI? But I like that though, because actually we are all AI. AI is us. It's our data, right? I mean, I always love when people say, well, the AI do this. The AI is just a model, right? So anyway, actually, I liked the little thought-provoking there. We have time for one last question, and Lynette, it's going to go to you. And it's another really easy question. So, shouldn't we focus on solidifying our data sovereignty instead of AI governance for the global south, especially in Africa, which has been overlooked? So this big tension between data sovereignty and not sovereignty.
Yeah, and I have spent the last 1 year and continue to do so, really thinking about data sovereignty, especially for African countries. So it's a very apt question for me. Sovereignty does include governance. So sovereignty is not a very exclusive concept to AI governance. But sovereignty also comes with commitments. Are we making the right commitment to be sovereign? When I was talking about skills and being able to develop the AIs here, We have possibly, hopefully, heard of the concept of sovereignty washing, where, everyone talks about African countries need to be sovereign. But then what does sovereignty actually, take? For Africans to govern themselves and to develop their own systems, there needs to be investments, there needs to be the right skills, the data really needs to be there. So we can focus on that, and we should in fact focus on that. And what that is going to do, it's going to ensure that in the global south, we are going to develop the data systems, we are going to develop the skills that are needed, we are going to ensure that we have the right infrastructure. We're going to ensure that we are creating the right models. When there was a question, so I'll kind of merge it up. When we're talking about inclusion, including Africans, including women, including our children or men of African descent, we have to make sure that we are the ones who are building. When we're talking about bias is an overrepresentation of one's experiences. So the bias that we are seeing in AI is simply because that AI is not coming out of the continent. So we really need to, for us to be truly sovereign, the AI needs to come from the continent. So the investments need to come from here. The data needs to come from here, so we have to represent our data sets. The skills have to come from here, so we need to make sure that the people who are building the models to a large extent look like us, to a large extent have our experiences, and that is how we will become truly sovereign, and that is how we will become truly represented. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're out of time, and we're between you and coffee, I think. So what a great conversation to unpack around these huge questions of power, exploring these tensions around self-agency, around spaces, around resources, getting to the specifics of what we need to do. So we've only scratched the top of the iceberg, but I really, really appreciate it. So Lynette, Fabrizio, Matthew, Charlene, and Janet, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Panelists, please stay up on stage for a picture. Panelists, please stay up stage. A big round of applause for the panelists. A big round of applause for the keynote speakers. And a big round of applause for Chris Maloney for moderating this session very well. I am between you and tea, so I have a few announcements. If you've lost something within the 3 days we've been here, it can be found at the help desk. If you've lost something, you go to the help desk and it'll be found there. And when you're transitioning from this room to another room, please carry your belongings. Carry your belongings with you, because there'll be community sessions happening and also some sessions happening in Ballroom 1 and Ballroom 2, and we want to transition those rooms as well. And the tea is being served between now, 10:45 to 11:15. So be back in your respective rooms by 11:20 so we can start the next sessions by 11:30. Thank you so much. Enjoy your tea, mingle, network, and get to know each other. Thank you so much. Asante sana.